Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a steam-powered hero hunter. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air tasted of ozone and burnt sugar. That was the first thing Izuku Midoriya noticed as he scrambled through the panicked crowd, his yellow backpack bouncing wildly against his shoulders. The scent was a bizarre cocktail, the sickly sweet aftermath of the sludge villain's rampage clashing with the electric tang that always lingered in the wake of a top-tier hero. For a fleeting, shameful second, the fanboy in him catalogued the sensation for his notebooks. All Might's presence leaves a distinct ionization in the air, different from Endeavor's sulfuric smell. Then the shame curdled into pure, ice-cold terror. "Mom?" His voice was a thin, reedy thing, swallowed by the roar of the crowd and the distant wail of sirens. He shoved past a businessman clutching a briefcase to his chest, his eyes scanning the chaos. He'd only been separated from her for a minute. She'd been waiting by the crosswalk, holding a bag of groceries, while he had sprinted ahead, drawn by the familiar sounds of a hero fight like a moth to a catastrophic flame. He'd seen it all: Bakugo's desperate, explosive defiance, the panicked inaction of the other heroes, and then, the glorious, earth-shaking arrival of All Might. He'd seen the punch. Texas Smash. It was more than a punch. It was a meteorological event. The air pressure shifted so violently it felt like his eardrums were trying to escape his skull. A cyclone of wind tore through the street, ripping newspapers from stands and sending hats cartwheeling into the sky. The sludge villain had atomized into a foul-smelling rain, and the crowd had erupted in a euphoric cheer. Izuku had cheered, too, tears of awe and relief streaming down his face. His hero. He was here. Everything was okay, but the cheer had died in his throat. Over the roar of the adoring public, there was another sound. A high, metallic screech, like the tortured scream of a dying machine. It was followed by a series of percussive, echoing cracks. Izuku's head snapped towards the sound. A 5-story building adjacent to the fight was shrouded in scaffolding, its steel bones wrapped in green mesh. The structure was shuddering, vibrating from the shockwave of All Might's blow. He watched, his blood turning to ice, as one of the main support struts, its bolts sheared clean off by the pneumatic force, buckled. The collapse happened in horrifying slow motion. A cascade of steel pipes, wooden planks, and mesh netting peeled away from the building's face, falling like a metal waterfall onto the street below, the very street where his mother had been standing. M.O.M. The word was a raw, primal scream this time, tearing from his lungs. He fought against the tide of people, their faces a mixture of awe for the hero and blissful ignorance of the new disaster. He saw Death Arms, one of the heroes who had stood by uselessly, finally move. The hero braced himself, his quirk flexing his muscles, and caught a large section of the falling debris, grunting with the effort. But it was too little, too late. He was a single pillar against an avalanche. Pipes and planks rained down all around him, smashing into the pavement with sickening crunches. Izuku pushed through the last line of gawkers and stumbled into the zone of devastation. The air was thick with dust. A car's alarm blared incessantly. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of denial. She moved. She got out of the way. She's fine. She has to be fine. He saw the green plastic of their grocery bag first, ripped open. A carton of eggs was a yellow and white smear on the asphalt next to a crushed carton of milk. And then he saw her. She was half buried under a pile of splintered 2x4s and a heavy-looking steel cross brace. Only her legs and one arm were visible. Her floral print dress was torn and stained with something dark. She wasn't moving. The world dissolved into a ringing tunnel of sound. Izuku fell to his knees, the sharp edges of gravel digging into his skin, but he felt nothing. No. No, 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 no. The mantra was a breathless whisper. He crawled forward, his hands shaking too violently to be of any use. He tried to lift one of the planks, but it was too heavy, pinned by the weight of the steel above it. "Help!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Somebody, help! My mom is under here!" Death Arms, having deposited his load of debris, jogged over. His face was grim, streaked with sweat and grime. "Stand back, kid. Let me see." With a grunt, the hero tore away the larger pieces of wreckage, tossing them aside like firewood. As Inko Midoriya was fully revealed, a choke sound escaped Izuku's throat. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow and ragged. The steel brace lay across her torso and pelvis, pinning her to the ground at an unnatural angle. "We need a medic!" Death Arms bellowed over his shoulder. All Might landed nearby, the ground trembling. He was already surrounded by reporters, their cameras flashing. He gave his signature, booming laugh, a sound that had always filled Izuku with hope but now sounded like a death knell. "Fear not, citizens! For I am here!" he declared, striking a pose. The crowd roared its approval. "He doesn't even see," Izuku whispered, a horrifying sense of detachment washing over him. He was watching the scene from outside his own body. He could see his hero, the symbol of peace, not 20 yards away, basking in glory while his mother bled on the pavement. A wave of nausea, bitter and hot, rose in his throat. A paramedic team finally pushed through, and the next few minutes were a blur of urgent, clipped commands, the whine of a hydraulic spreader, and the gentle, careful process of loading his mother onto a backboard. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind, tired eyes, knelt beside him. "Are you her son?" she asked softly. Izuku could only nod, his throat locked tight. "We're taking her to Mizutafu General Hospital. You can ride in the front of the ambulance." As they wheeled the gurney away, Izuku stumbled after them. He glanced back one last time. All Might was giving an interview, his smile as bright and brilliant as the sun. Behind him, Death Arms was shrugging, talking to a police officer. Izuku's ears, unnaturally sharp in his state of shock, caught a snippet of their conversation. "Wasn't much I could do," Death Arms said, gesturing vaguely at the collapsed scaffolding. "The shockwave was just too strong. Collateral damage is part of the job, you know? The main thing is, the villain was stopped." Collateral damage. The phrase echoed in the hollow space where Izuku's heart used to be. His mother wasn't a person. She was a statistic. An acceptable loss in the glorious war on villainy. In that moment, something inside him, a bright, hopeful flame he had nurtured his entire life, didn't just flicker. It was snuffed out, leaving behind nothing but cold, bitter ash. The rooftop was cold. The wind whipped around the corners of the building, a lonely, mournful sound that mirrored the howling emptiness inside Izuku. He had found All Might by pure, obsessive instinct, clinging to the hero's leg as he made his impossibly high leap, a desperate act born of a desperate need for an answer. All Might stood before him, steam pouring from his body as he deflated into a skeletal, haggard man Izuku didn't recognize. The symbol of peace was a fragile secret, a dying ember. The sight should have shocked him, but Izuku was too numb to feel anything but a distant, clinical curiosity. Toshinori Yagi explained his injury, his time limit, the grim reality behind the smile. He spoke of the responsibility of heroes, the need for overwhelming power to inspire hope and strike fear into the hearts of villains. Izuku listened, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The words were hollow, meaningless platitudes. My mother was at the fight today," Izuku said, his voice flat, devoid of the stammering awe he would have had just that morning. "She was hurt. The scaffolding, it fell because of your Texas smash." Toshinori's already grim face paled further. The hollows of his cheeks seemed to deepen. I see. The paramedics on scene. I was assured all civilian injuries were minor." He coughed, a racking sound that brought a spray of blood to his lips. "I am truly sorry, young man. It is a terrible thing when innocents are caught in the crossfire. Rest assured, the Hero Commission's relief fund will cover her expenses." He said it like it was a script. A pre-approved, legally vetted statement for just such an occasion. It was the same tone Death Arms had used. "Collateral damage. The doctors don't know if she'll walk again," Izuku stated, each word a carefully placed stone. "Her career as a nurse is over. Our lives are over. And it's because a hero was more concerned with stopping one villain than protecting everyone else." A flicker of genuine pain crossed Toshinori's face. "The choices we make in the heat of battle are never easy, my boy. I had to end that threat immediately. Lives were at stake." "Bakugo's life was at stake," Izuku corrected, his voice gaining a hard, sharp edge. "And you saved him." But what about everyone else? What about the people who aren't being actively attacked? Don't they deserve a hero, too? A hero who thinks, who plans, who considers every consequence instead of just punching? Tashinori was taken aback by the boy's cold, analytical fury. This wasn't the fawning fan from moments ago. This was an accuser. That's an unfair assessment. Heroism is about sacrifice. Is it? Izuku interrupted, taking a step forward. Or is it about fame? About victory? You won today, All Might. You're on every news channel. They're calling it a triumph. No one is talking about the 5 other people who were sent to the hospital. No one is talking about my mother. He finally looked up, and the raw, burning grief in his green eyes made the number 1 hero flinch. So I have to ask. Even without a quirk, can I be a hero? Can I be a hero who doesn't make those mistakes? A hero who saves everyone, not just the person in the most immediate danger? It was the same question he'd always dreamed of asking, but now it was poisoned. Twisted. It was no longer a plea for validation, it was a challenge. All Might, drained from his fight, haunted by this boy's accusation, and weighed down by the grim reality of his own mortality, finally broke. He looked at the scrawny, trembling, quirkless boy before him, a boy filled with a righteous and dangerous anger, and he made the most pragmatic, and most devastating, choice. He gave him the truth as he saw it. No, he said, the word hanging in the cold air between them. Without a quirk, you cannot be a hero. He went on, explaining the danger, the self-sacrifice, how pro-heroes risk their lives every day. He spoke of how he couldn't, in good conscience, encourage someone so powerless to walk that path. He tried to be kind, to be realistic. He suggested becoming a police officer, a doctor. Good, noble professions where he could still help people. But Izuku wasn't listening. He had heard the first word, and it had been a hammer blow, shattering the last, fragile remnants of his spirit. All Might, the man who preached that anyone could be a hero, the man whose smile was supposed to make everything okay, was telling him that not only could he not be a hero, but that the kind of hero he wanted to be, a careful, intelligent hero who prevented tragedies like the one that had just befallen his family, was an impossibility for someone like him. Power was the only thing that mattered. The power to punch. I see, Izuku said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He bowed his head, his green curls hiding his expression. Thank you for your time, All Might. He turned and walked towards the door to the stairwell without another word. Tashinori watched him go, a profound sense of guilt and failure settling in his gut. He had a feeling he had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. He had tried to douse a fire, but he felt as though he had only starved it of oxygen, forcing it to burn hotter, deeper, and in a much more dangerous way. Weeks bled into a monotonous, antiseptic haze. The hospital became Izuku's world. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was his clock. The smell of disinfectant and sterile linen was his air. The sight of his mother, small and broken in the stark white bed, was his sun and moon. Her injuries were severe. Multiple spinal fractures, a shattered pelvis, and internal damage that had required several surgeries. The doctors used gentle, professional words like long road to recovery and uncertain prognosis. But Izuku, a prodigy at analysis, could read the truth in the spaces between their words. She would live, but she would never be the same. The nerve damage was extensive. Walking, let alone returning to her physically demanding job as a nurse, was a distant, shimmering fantasy. During the day, Izuku was the perfect son. He read to her, he held her hand when the pain was bad, he reassured her with a smile that felt like a plaster mask cracking on his face. He handled the endless stream of paperwork, insurance forms, hospital bills, applications for disability assistance, with a cold efficiency that unnerved the hospital staff. But at night, when Inko was asleep, her breathing a soft, medicated rattle, Izuku would sit by the window, his notebooks open on his lap. They were no longer shrines. They were armories. He'd started with hero analysis for the future, number 13. He opened to the 2-page spread on All Might, covered in loving, detailed drawings and effusive praise. For a long time, he just stared at the page, his knuckles white as he gripped his pen. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he began to write. He didn't scribble it out. He dissected it. Next to a drawing of the Texas smash, he wrote in neat, blocky letters, massive kinetic force. Uncontrolled aerial effect. High probability of structural damage to urban environments. Ineffective for hostage situations requiring precision. Use only in open areas. He went to the page on death arms. Quirk, super strength. Applied primarily to biceps and pectorals. Limited lifting capacity compared to top-tier strength quirks. Slow reaction time to peripheral threats. Over-reliance on brute force leads to tactical blind spots. He wrote a new entry for the incident itself. He drew diagrams of the street, the building, the scaffolding. He calculated wind speeds and force vectors. He noted the heroes on the scene and their quirks. He listed their failures, one by one, in a cold, unforgiving list. Kamui Woods, ineffective against non-organic opponent. Failure to create wooden barriers to protect civilians from potential debris. Empty Lady, arrived too late. Quirk is unsuitable for crowded streets. Presence would have caused more damage. Backdraft, focused solely on cordoning the area. No attempt to reinforce surrounding structures. His analysis became his obsession. It was the only thing that kept the screaming grief at bay. He filled page after page not with admiration, but with vulnerabilities. Weaknesses. Exploits. He analyzed support gear, noting stress points and power sources. He cross-referenced news reports with public property damage records, building a database of heroes who consistently valued swift victory over public safety. He saw a pattern of recklessness, of vanity, of a system that rewarded flashy, destructive power and swept the consequences, the collateral damage, under the rug. His mother, a woman who had spent her life healing people, was broken by the very people meant to protect them. The irony was so profound, so hideously cruel, it transcended anger and settled deep in his bones as a cold, hard certainty. The system was broken. The heroes were flawed. And All Might, the pillar holding it all up, was a dying man who believed that only the powerful had the right to correct it. One evening, a news report on the small television in the corner of the room caught his attention. It was a fluff piece. A local news station was presenting Death Arms with a Community Heroism Award for his brave actions during the sludge villain incident. The footage showed him catching that one piece of scaffolding. The reporter praised his strength and quick thinking. There was no mention of the rest of the collapse, no mention of the injured. Izuku watched, his face impassive, as the hero accepted the plaque with a humble, practiced smile. I just did what any hero would do, Death Arms said to the camera. Protecting the public is our #1 priority. Something inside Izuku's chest, something he thought had already died, fractured completely. He closed his notebook, the pen clicking shut with an air of finality. Analysis wasn't enough. Understanding their weaknesses wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed power. Not a quirk. Not the genetic lottery ticket he had been denied. He needed a different kind of power. A power that could be built. A power that could be controlled. A power that could hold the heroes accountable. That night he didn't sleep. He scoured the internet, diving deep into the forgotten corners of the web. He wasn't searching hero forums anymore. He was digging through engineering archives, fringe science blogs, and support tech forums that had been shut down for years. He was looking for a ghost, a name he'd seen mentioned in hushed, dismissive tones in old articles about support industry regulation. A man who was called a genius by some and a dangerous radical by others. A man who believed quirks were a crutch, and that true power lay in iron, and steam, and steel. He found him in a post on a defunct forum from a decade ago. A single, cryptic comment from a user named Boilerplate. The HPSC fears the piston more than the fist. They fear the boiler more than the bomb. Because one is a gift, and the other is an equalizer. The comment was linked to a discarded business address on the industrial outskirts of the city. A junkyard. Izuku looked at his sleeping mother, at the tubes and wires that kept her tethered to a life of pain. He looked at the city lights glowing outside the window, a constant reminder of the society that had celebrated her crippling. His decision was made. The junkyard smelled of rust, oil, and forgotten things. It was a metal graveyard, a sprawling expanse of decaying cars, mountains of scrap, and discarded industrial machinery. A fence of corrugated iron, topped with jagged, angry-looking wire surrounded the perimeter. The gate was chained, but a section of the fence had been pulled back just enough for a person to squeeze through. Izuku slipped into the yard, his heart a steady, determined drum in his chest. He clutched his backpack, which held not his schoolbooks, but his most recent notebook and a folder thick with his research. He followed a dirt path that wound through the metal canyons, the crunch of his sneakers on gravel the only sound. In the center of the yard he found it. It wasn't a building so much as a cancerous growth of metal, a central workshop welded haphazardly to several shipping containers, with chimneys jutting out at odd angles, puffing lazy gray smoke into the overcast sky. The rhythmic, metallic sound of a hammer striking an anvil echoed from within. Clang. Hiss. Clang. Hiss. The main door was a massive, sliding sheet of reinforced steel. Izuku hesitated for only a second before rapping his knuckles against it. The hammering stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a smaller viewport slid open with a screech of rusty metal, and a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes, nested in a web of wrinkles, peered out. "We're not open," a gruff voice rasped. "And we don't buy scrap from kids. Get lost." The viewport started to slide shut. "I'm not here to sell," Izuku said quickly, his voice clear and firm. "I'm looking for Kaido Tanaka. I was told I could find him here." The viewport stopped. The eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm here because I read your work. Your theories on high-pressure steam actuators and pneumatic force multiplication, the ones the Hero Public Safety Commission called unstable and dangerously unregulated." There was a long pause. Izuku could feel the old man's scrutiny, a palpable weight. Finally, a series of heavy bolts were thrown, and the massive door groaned open just enough for him to enter. The man who stood before him was ancient, a wiry frame lost in a grease-stained boiler suit. He had a wild mane of white hair that seemed to defy gravity, and a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood. He held a heavy ball-peen hammer in one hand. The workshop behind him was a steampunk wonderland. The air was hot and thick with the smell of coal and machine oil. Brass pipes snaked across the ceiling, feeding a series of humming, hissing contraptions. Gears the size of dinner plates were stacked on shelves next to delicate-looking pressure gauges. In the center of the room, on a heavy-duty workbench, was the half-finished frame of a massive metal arm, powered by a series of gleaming copper pistons. "You've got a lot of nerve, kid," Kaido Tanaka said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Spouting off about the HPSC. They buried me." "What do you want?" Izuku didn't flinch. He met the old inventor's gaze. He unzipped his backpack, pulled out his notebook, and laid it open on a clear space on a cluttered workbench. It was open to his analysis of death arms. "This man is a pro-hero," Izuku began, his finger tracing the lines of his own writing. "His quirk gives him enhanced strength, but he has a 20% lag in reaction time when dealing with multiple, simultaneous threats. His standard-issue support braces can withstand 3 tons of direct pressure, but they have a design flaw at the elbow joint. A precise strike there with enough force would shatter them, rendering his arms useless." He flipped the page to his analysis of the scaffolding collapse, complete with diagrams and force calculations. "This is the incident where my mother was crippled. It was caused by the shockwave from All Might's Texas smash. The collapse could have been mitigated, if not prevented, by 3 of the heroes present, but their quirks were either unsuited for the task or they failed to analyze the secondary threats." Kaido stared at the notebook, his sharp eyes taking in the terrifyingly detailed notes, the precise diagrams, the cold, emotionless assessment of power and weakness. He looked from the book to the boy. This wasn't a fan. This wasn't a hero worshipper. This was something else entirely. "Impressive analysis," Kaido grunted, a flicker of something, interest, perhaps, in his eyes. "You've got the mind of a tactician. But what's this got to do with me? You want me to build better support gear for these morons?" He spat on the ground. "Not interested." "No," Izuku said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an intensity that filled the cavernous workshop. "I don't want you to help them. I want you to help me stop them." He looked up from the notebook, his green eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire that seemed to shock the old man. "You wrote that society fears the boiler more than the bomb because one is a gift, and the other is an equalizer. I have no gift. I am quirkless. The world has told me I am powerless to change anything. They are wrong. Izuku slid his folder onto the bench. It was filled with the evidence he had compiled. News reports, damage claims, witness statements. A litany of heroic negligence. The system is broken. It rewards power, not responsibility. It celebrates victory, not safety. The heroes have become arrogant, careless. They need to be reminded of the consequences of their actions. They need to be held accountable. He finally voiced the purpose that had been crystallizing in his soul for weeks. He didn't ask to be a hero. He didn't ask for a miracle. He asked for something far more tangible. I have the knowledge to predict their every move, to pinpoint their every weakness. But I lack the power to exploit it. You have the power. You have the knowledge to build a great equalizer out of iron and steam. I want you to help me build it. He paused, taking a steadying breath. I want to hunt them. Kaido Tanaka was silent for a full minute, his gaze locked on the boy. He saw the grief. He saw the rage. But beneath it all, he saw a will of forged steel and a mind like a diamond drill. He saw a kindred spirit, another soul who had been broken and discarded by the age of quirks. He saw the perfect, terrifying vessel for his life's work, for his own long-nursed grudge against the commission that had cast him out. A slow, grim smile spread across the old inventor's face, a cracking of dry earth. He picked up his hammer, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Get the forge lit, kid, Kaido Tanaka rasped, a dangerous new light glinting in his eyes. We have work to do. The pact was sealed not with a handshake, but with the searing heat of the forge. Kaido Tanaka did not believe in coddling. The moment Izuku accepted his new path, the old man shoved a heavy leather apron into his hands and pointed a gnarled finger towards a mountain of coal. The first rule of this workshop, boy. Kaito rasped, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate with the hum of the machinery around them. Is that everything has a price? My knowledge, my tools, this roof over your head, it's all paid for in sweat and coal dust. You want to build a revolution? Fine. First, you will learn to feed the beast that powers it. That beast was the forge. A massive, brick-lined furnace that dominated one entire wall of the workshop, its hungry mouth glowing with a malevolent orange light. For the first month, Izuku's life became a grueling, monotonous cycle. He woke before dawn, his muscles screaming in protest, and spent hours shoveling coal, hauling scrap metal, and cleaning the grime that was as much a part of the workshop as the air itself. It was a deliberate, calculated breaking down. Kaido watched him with an eagle's eye, offering no praise, only sharp, cutting critiques. Your swing is inefficient. Use your legs, not just your back. Are you trying to split that beam or tickle it? You call that clean? I see enough grease on that gear to lubricate a battleship. Stop thinking like a student. Start thinking like a component. What is your function? To move the coal. So move it. Izuku's soft, uncalloused hands were shredded within days, blooming with blisters that bled, hardened, and finally became a permanent, leathery armor of calluses. The scrawny, bookish boy began to disappear, burned away by the forge's heat and hammered into a new shape on the anvil of raw labor. His shoulders broadened, wiry muscle, forged in the repetitive strain of lifting and hauling, began to define his arms and back. He ate ravenously, slept like the dead, and woke up aching, only to do it all again. His grief was still there, a cold, dense star in the center of his chest. But now, it had a purpose. Every swing of the sledgehammer was a blow against the hero who had smiled for the cameras. Every shovelful of coal was fuel for the fire of his vengeance. The pain in his body was a welcome distraction from the pain in his soul, a physical penance that made him feel, for the first time since his mother's injury, like he was doing something. In the evenings, when the physical labor was done, the real education began. Kaido would throw ancient, grease-stained textbooks and complex schematics onto a workbench. Principles of thermodynamics, advanced metallurgy, hydraulic and pneumatic systems engineering. Read, he would command. And understand. I won't have an idiot piloting my masterpiece. Izuku devoured the knowledge with the same desperate hunger he had once reserved for hero trivia. His analytical mind, honed by years of dissecting quirks, was perfectly suited to this new language of pressure, tolerance, and stress yields. He filled new notebooks, not with hero costumes and ultimate moves, but with gear ratios, boiler designs, and the complex mathematics of fluid dynamics. He learned the subtle art of welding, the feel of two pieces of steel becoming one under the intense heat of the arc. He learned to listen to the machines, to diagnose a problem not by sight, but by the subtle change in a piston's hiss or the off-key whine of a straining gear. He was no longer just a boy in a junkyard. He was becoming an extension of the workshop itself, his mind and body being reforged in tandem. One night, months into his apprenticeship, Kaido found him asleep at the workbench, his head pillowed on an open schematic for a steam-powered locomotive. His face was smudged with grease, his breathing deep and even. For a fleeting moment, the hard lines of the old inventor's face softened. He saw not the weapon he was trying to create, but a fiercely determined boy pushing himself past the brink of exhaustion. Kaido gently took an old wool blanket from his own cot and draped it over Izuku's shoulders before returning to his own work, the rhythmic clang of his hammer a little softer than usual. The change in Izuku was most apparent during his weekly visits to the hospital. He would scrub the grease from under his fingernails until they were raw, change into clean clothes, and put on the mask of the dutiful, hopeful son. But the nurses noticed the difference. His hands were rough and calloused. There was a new, unsettling stillness in his eyes, a depth that seemed far too old for a boy his age. "You've been working out, Izuku," his mother Inko commented one afternoon, her voice a little stronger than the week before. She reached out and squeezed his bicep, her touch weak but warm. "You're so strong now, just helping out a friend with his workshop," Izuku replied, his smile practiced and easy. "It's good to keep busy." He never told her the truth. He couldn't. Her hero was still All Might. Her world still believed in the flawless goodness of the heroes who had broken her. To tell her what he was doing would be to break her all over again, and that was a line he would not cross. Her well-being was the sacred ground upon which his entire crusade was built. As he sat by her bed, listening to her talk about physical therapy, he would trace the lines on his calloused palms and feel the weight of the metal beast he was building in the darkness, all for her. The day they began construction on the suit was a day of solemn ceremony. Kaido cleared the central workspace, a platform of reinforced steel that sat directly under the workshop's main hoist. "Today, we stop building the smith and start building the sword," Kaido announced, unfurling a massive, yellowed blueprint across the platform. It was a thing of terrifying beauty, a masterpiece of mechanical engineering that depicted a hulking, humanoid form. It was labeled in stark, block letters, boilerplate, Mark I. "This is not a support suit," Kaido explained, his finger tracing the intricate lines of pistons and pipes. "Support suits are designed to augment a quirk. They are secondary. This," he tapped the drawing of the massive boiler on the suit's back, "is a primary system. It does not augment. It overwrites. We are building a walking, self-contained industrial revolution, boy, and you are its engine." They started with the skeleton, a frame of salvaged tungsten steel from an old bank vault door, melted down and recast in the forge. It was a brutal, skeletal frame, built not for elegance, but for pure, unyielding durability. Izuku did most of the work himself, Kaido guiding his hand, teaching him how to read the metal, to know when it was ready to be bent, when it was ready to be quenched. Next came the muscles, the pneumatic piston system. These were the suit's primary source of strength. They salvaged massive hydraulic arms from derelict construction mechs, and Izuku spent weeks meticulously retrofitting them. He replaced hydraulic lines with high-pressure, braided copper piping. He recalibrated the actuators, tuning them to respond to a complex series of manual controls he would operate from within the cockpit. His analysis notebooks were invaluable here. He designed the piston's output to mimic the force of heroes like Death Arms, but with a degree of control and precision they could only dream of. The heart of the machine was the boiler. It was a custom job, a high-pressure, coal-fired monstrosity that would be mounted on the suit's back. It was Kaido's magnum opus, a design he had perfected over decades of exile. It used a forced induction system to burn crushed coal with terrifying efficiency, capable of generating steam pressure that, by all rights, should have torn the entire apparatus apart. "The secret," Kaido explained, his eyes gleaming with a mad sort of pride as they riveted the final boilerplate into place. Is not in containing the pressure, but in channeling it. This entire suit is a pressure release valve. Every step, every punch, every hiss of steam is the boiler exhaling. You don't fight the power, boy. You learn to dance with it. The weeks turned into a season, then another. The boilerplate Mark took shape. It was not the sleek, heroic armor of comic books. It was a monster of industry, a hulking, asymmetrical golem of riveted steel plates, exposed copper piping, and grease-blackened pistons. Its head was a solid, dome-like helmet with a narrow, reinforced viewport, reminiscent of an old diving bell. Its arms were mismatched. The right was a heavily armored battering ram with a reinforced gauntlet, while the left was slightly smaller, equipped with a high-tension winch and grappling hook launcher. Its feet were massive, weighted things, designed to anchor the suit and provide a stable base of operations. Steam vents dotted its shoulders and joints, ready to release clouds of scalding vapor for evasion or attack. It stood a full 8 feet tall, a clanking, hissing titan born of scrap and fury. Izuku knew every bolt, every rivet, every gear. He had bled and sweat over every inch of it. As it neared completion, he began his final phase of training, simulation. Kaito had built a crude cockpit mock-up where Izuku spent hours practicing the complex sequence of levers, pedals, and pressure valves that would control the suit. It was like trying to play a pipe organ while simultaneously running a marathon. His movements had to be precise. A lever pulled too hard could overpressurize a limb and blow a joint, while a pedal pressed too softly would leave him a stationary target. Finally, after nearly a year of relentless toil, the day came. The boilerplate Mark stood complete on the central platform, tethered by heavy chains to the workshop floor. It was silent, cold, but it seemed to possess a malevolent life of its own, a sleeping giant waiting for a spark. "She's ready," Kaito said, his voice softer than Izuku had ever heard it. There was awe in his tone, and a hint of fear. "It's time to light the fire." Getting into the boilerplate was not a suit-up. It was an entombment. First came the pilot's undersuit, a thick, quilted canvas garment with leather padding at the joints, designed to protect him from the suit's crushing interior and scalding heat. Then, Kaito and Izuku used the workshop hoist to lift the main torso plate. Izuku squeezed into the cramped, dark cockpit, the smell of metal and oil overwhelming his senses. The interior was a claustrophobic cage of levers, gauges, and copper pipes that throbbed with latent pressure. Kaito bolted him in. The sound of the heavy hex bolts being tightened echoed like prison doors slamming shut. Izuku's view of the world was reduced to the narrow, horizontal slit of the helmet's viewport. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was the ghost in the machine. Initial ignition sequence. Kaito's voice crackled through a primitive, hardwired comm system in the helmet. Engaging the furnace pilot light. Stand by. Izuku felt a deep vibration start in his back as the furnace ignited. A low hum filled the cockpit. He watched the pressure gauges, his hands hovering over the controls. This was the most dangerous part. "Furnace is lit," Izuku reported, his voice tight. "Beginning coal feed." He pulled a lever, and a mechanical auger began to feed crushed coal into the boiler. The hum grew into a deep, guttural roar. The temperature inside the cockpit began to climb rapidly, the air growing thick and humid. The pipes around him started to hiss and groan as steam began to fill the system. "Pressure is climbing," Izuku said, his eyes glued to the main gauge. 100 psi. 150. Let her climb. Kaito's voice crackled. "Don't engage the actuators until we hit 300. Let the pressure equalize through the primary conduits." The suit shuddered around him, a beast waking from a long slumber. The roar of the boiler was a deafening, all-consuming sound. Sweat beaded on Izuku's forehead, stinging his eyes. The gauge needle crept past 250, then 280. The entire frame was vibrating, the metal groaning under the immense, contained power. "Pressure at 300 psi. Izuku yelled over the roar. "I'm at operational pressure." "Good," Kaito said. "Now listen to me, boy. Gently. The controls are sensitive. Just a little pressure on the foot pedal. We're just going to test the right leg's primary piston. Just lift it an inch." Izuku took a deep, shaky breath. His foot pressed down on the heavy steel pedal. He felt the system engage, a deep kerchunk as the steam was diverted. The right side of the suit lurched, and then, all hell broke loose. A sound like a gunshot echoed through the cockpit, deafeningly loud. A searing pain shot up Izuku's right leg. The entire suit tilted violently to the side, throwing him against his restraints. Red warning lights flashed on his control panel. The main pressure gauge was dropping precipitously. A high-pitched scream filled the air, the sound of superheated steam escaping at incredible velocity. "Shut it down!" Kaido screamed through the calm. "Vent the boiler!" Now, Izuku's training kicked in. His hands flew across the control panel, ignoring the fire in his leg. He slammed his palm down on a large, red lever marked emergency vent. With a cataclysmic roar, the vents on the suit's shoulders blew open. A massive cloud of white steam erupted, blasting towards the workshop ceiling with the force of a geyser. The pressure inside the suit plummeted. The screaming hiss died down, replaced by the ominous ticking of cooling metal. Izuku hung in the cockpit, panting, his body trembling with adrenaline and pain. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled his helmet. "Izuku! Report! Are you alright?" Kaido's voice was filled with a frantic energy Izuku had never heard before. I think so," Izuku gasped. "My leg, something hit my leg." The right leg piston, it seized. It took Kaido 10 minutes to unbolt the torso plate and pry it open. The workshop was filled with a thick, humid fog. When he finally got Izuku out, the problem was immediately apparent. The cockpit's inner wall on the right side was warped and blackened. One of the primary steam conduits leading to the leg piston had burst at a joint, sending a jet of scalding steam and shrapnel directly into the leg compartment. Izuku's padded undersuit was scorched, and a nasty, blistering burn was already blooming on his calf. The right leg of the boilerplate was locked at a grotesque angle, its main piston bent and warped from the explosive pressure release. Izuku stumbled out of the suit and collapsed onto the platform, clutching his leg, his face pale with shock and pain. He had failed. After all this time, all this work, it had failed. The suit was a death trap. His crusade was over before it had even begun. Despair, cold and familiar, threatened to drown him. Kaido, however, was not looking at him. The old man was staring at the damaged suit, his expression not one of despair, but of intense, furious concentration. He ran a hand over the ruptured pipe, his fingers tracing the jagged edges of the metal. "I was a fool," Kaido muttered, his voice a low growl. "Single rivet seal on a primary pressure conduit. Arrogant. I thought the copper alloy would hold." He looked down at Izuku, who was sitting amidst the wreckage of his hopes, his head in his hands. "Get up," Kaido said, his voice hard as iron. Izuku looked up, his eyes glassy. "It's a failure. It's too dangerous. I could have been killed." "Yes, you could have," Kaido said, without a shred of sympathy. "Power is dangerous. Fire is dangerous. Gravity is dangerous. Did you think this would be easy? Did you think you could just strap on a suit and punch your problems away like one of them?" He gestured dismissively towards the city beyond the junkyard walls. "This is not a failure, boy. This is a lesson. And it's the most important one you will ever learn." He grabbed Izuku by the arm and pulled him to his feet, forcing him to look at the broken machine. "What happened?" "Analyze it. Don't whine. Don't despair. Tell me what went wrong." The command was so sharp, so unexpected, it cut through Izuku's fog of self-pity. He looked at the ruptured pipe, at the warped piston. His analytical mind, the core of who he was, took over. The pain in his leg faded into the background. He limped closer, his eyes scanning the damage. The seal on the T-joint, it couldn't handle the pressure spike when the actuator engaged. The force of the steam was diverted laterally instead of into the piston chamber, causing the blowout. He pointed a trembling, grease-stained finger. "And there, the overflow coolant pipe is on the far side of the joint." By the time the excess heat and pressure could be vented, the conduit had already reached critical failure. He looked up at Kaido, a new light dawning in his eyes. "It's a design flaw." "Exactly," Kaido grunted, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Izuku's mind was racing now, the despair replaced by a frantic energy of problem-solving. He stumbled over to the workbench, ignoring the protests of his burned leg, and grabbed the blueprints for the suit. He spread them out, his hands moving with purpose. If we reroute the coolant pipe to run parallel to the main conduit, it can act as a heat sink and draw off excess thermal energy before it becomes critical, he muttered, sketching furiously on the plans. And the seal needs to be reinforced. A single rivet isn't enough. We need a triple riveted tungsten brace, welded directly to the frame to distribute the stress. That would increase the joint's pressure tolerance by at least 30, maybe 40%. He looked up from the blueprint, his face flushed with excitement, the pain and the failure already a memory. He was no longer a victim of the machine. He was its master. Kaido Tanaka watched him, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. The boy's resilience was astonishing. He had faced death, stared into the heart of his own catastrophic failure, and his immediate, instinctual response was not to retreat, but to analyze, to adapt, to overcome. He had the soul of an engineer, the soul of a survivor. The forge is still hot, Kaido said, picking up a heavy wrench. Let's get to work. Izuku nodded, his expression hardening into one of cold, unshakable resolve. He had been tested by his creation, and he had not been found wanting. The boilerplate Markai had tried to kill him, but in doing so, it had only made him smarter, stronger. He looked at the hulking metal shell, no longer with fear, but with a newfound understanding. It wasn't just a suit of armor. It was an extension of his will, a physical manifestation of his rage and his grief, and like him, it would be broken down, reforged, and made perfect through the fires of adversity. The first test was a disaster, but the war was just beginning. The world, for pro-hero Slider, was a blur of cheering faces and the satisfying, high-friction sizzle of his quirk. His name was Koji Tanaka, no relation to the disgraced inventor, a fact his agent made painstakingly clear in every press release, and he was, in his own humble opinion, the future of metropolitan heroism. His quirk, Kinetic Glide, allowed him to drastically reduce the friction on any surface he touched with his feet and hands, and then convert his body's momentum into kinetic energy that he could ride like a wave. The result was a human bullet, a man who could skate across asphalt, grind up the side of a skyscraper, and corner like a Grand Prix motorcycle, all while leaving a signature trail of faintly glowing, superheated air in his wake. It was, to put it mildly, incredibly marketable. Thank you. No need to worry, citizens, he called out, striking a pose that was meticulously designed to show off the logo of his primary sponsor, Nitro Charge Energy Drink, emblazoned across his chest. He held the cowering purse snatcher by the scruff of his neck, the kid's ratty hoodie no match for his grip. Your friendly neighborhood Slider is always on the move to keep you safe. The crowd, a mix of afternoon shoppers and office workers on their lunch break, erupted in applause. Smartphone cameras flashed, capturing his good side, which was, of course, all of them. He'd just effortlessly run down the thief in a chase that spanned 3 city blocks, a dazzling display of high-speed maneuvers that had, regrettably but unavoidably, resulted in a shattered plate glass window at a high-end boutique and a series of deep, 10-foot-long gouges in the newly paved street. He handed the sniveling thief over to a pair of arriving police officers with a practiced, charming smile. Just a little mess to clean up, officers, he said, gesturing vaguely at the trail of destruction. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make a heroic omelet, am I right? The younger officer looked from the deep grooves in the road to the shattered storefront, and winced, but the older one just sighed and nodded. This was the cost of doing business in a city of heroes. Slider didn't dwell on it. The property damage reports were for his agency's accountants to handle. His job was the flash, the dash, and the cash that followed. As the police car pulled away, a reporter from a local news network pushed a microphone into his face. Slider, another spectacular takedown. Can you tell us what was going through your mind during the chase? Slider leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, camera-ready tone. You know, Marla, it's all about instinct. When you see someone in trouble, you don't think. You act. You become the solution, he winked. And a little nitro charge boost doesn't hurt either. It keeps me sliding when the villains are hiding. He loved this part. The adulation. The confirmation that he was not just a hero, but a star. His social media engagement would be through the roof after this. Slider saves the day. Nitro hero. He could already see the numbers climbing. This was what being a hero was all about. It wasn't the grim, grimy underground work of heroes like Eraserhead. It was about being a symbol, a bright, fast-moving beacon of hope and corporate sponsorship. The interview wrapped up, and the crowd began to disperse, leaving Slider to bask in the afterglow. He took a long, dramatic swig from the can of nitro charge an assistant had handed him. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows between the buildings. It was the golden hour. Perfect lighting. He leaned against a brick wall in the mouth of a narrow service alley, feigning a moment of heroic exhaustion for any lingering cameras. That's when he heard it. It was a strange sound, low and rhythmic, cutting through the fading city din. Clank. A pause. A soft, airy sound, like a giant sighing. Hiss. He frowned, tilting his head. It was probably just a sanitation truck or some late-running construction work. This part of the city was old, a maze of decaying industrial facades and forgotten service alleys. Clank. Hiss. The sound was closer now. It had a weight to it, a heavy, inexorable cadence that was deeply unsettling. It wasn't the chaotic rattle of machinery. It was methodical. Purposeful, like the footsteps of something enormous. He peered deeper into the alley, which was now cast in the deep purple shadows of twilight. A faint mist, thicker than normal evening condensation, seemed to be seeping from the darkness. It smelled of coal smoke and hot oil. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a little louder than he intended. "Everything all right back there?" No response. Only the sound. Clank. Hiss. It was just around the corner now, at the far end of the alley. The ground seemed to vibrate with each heavy footfall. Slider pushed himself off the wall, a flicker of genuine annoyance replacing his post-victory calm. Some idiot in a junker mech was probably going to scratch the paint on a dumpster, and he'd get blamed for it. "Hey pal, this is a restricted area," he said, striding into the alley. "Heroic cleanup in progress. You're going to have to." His words died in his throat. A figure emerged from the thick, swirling steam. It was not a man. It was a monster. A golem of riveted iron and tarnished brass, standing a full head and shoulders taller than he was. It was a walking furnace, a nightmare of industrial revolution given horrifying, humanoid form. A massive, barrel-chested torso was mounted on thick, piston-driven legs, each step landing with the crushing finality of a factory press. A huge, copper-banded boiler was strapped to its back, its surface hot enough to make the air around it shimmer. A single, narrow viewport of thick, reinforced glass glowed with a faint, internal light, a malevolent yellow eye and a faceless, dome-like helmet. Pipes snaked across its body like metallic veins, all of them weeping thin tendrils of steam. Slider's blood ran cold. This wasn't a mech. Mechs were piloted, and you could usually see the cockpit, the pilot, some sign of human life. This thing moved as if the machine itself were alive. It was a villain. A new one. He'd never seen anything like it in the hero database. His professional instincts, buried under layers of media training and brand management, finally kicked in. "Halt! Identify yourself, villain!" he commanded, his voice betraying a slight tremor. The iron golem didn't respond. It simply took another step forward, the sound of its internal machinery a symphony of grinding gears and pneumatic pressure. Clank. Hiss. Fine. If it wanted a fight, it would get one. This would be even better for his brand. Slider single-handedly defeats mysterious new mechanical menace. The headlines wrote themselves. "You picked the wrong hero to mess with, Buckethead." Slider crouched, placing his hands on the cracked asphalt. He channeled his quirk, and the familiar, invigorating energy flowed through him. The soles of his custom-made, friction-resistant boots began to glow. "Let's see you keep up with this." He launched himself forward. He was a blur of motion, a streak of light in the dim alley. He planned to circle the mechanical monstrosity, build up speed, and then slam into it from behind, targeting the boiler on its back. A direct hit at top speed should be enough to cripple it, or at least knock the lumbering brute off its feet. He zipped past the thing's right side, the wind screaming in his ears. The golem didn't even seem to track his movement. Its head remained fixed, its single eye glowing impassively. Too slow, Slider thought with a surge of arrogant confidence. It's just a big, dumb tank. He banked hard off the far wall, leaving a scorching black mark on the brickwork, and rocketed back towards his target's exposed back. He was moving at nearly 80 miles per hour now, a human missile ready to strike. He braced for impact. Just as he was about to connect, one of the large vents on the golem's shoulder blew open with a deafening roar. Whoosh! A massive, instantaneous cloud of scalding white steam erupted from the vent, engulfing the entire alley. It wasn't just vapor, it was thick, wet, and blindingly hot. It hit Slider like a physical wall. His world dissolved into a maelstrom of white noise and searing heat. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The superheated moisture fogged his visor and burned his exposed skin. His quirk, which relied on precise contact with the surface, sputtered as his boots hit a patch of slick condensation created by the steam. He lost control. His trajectory went wide, and he slammed shoulder first into the alley wall with a sickening crunch. He cried out in pain, his momentum gone, and tumbled onto a pile of overflowing trash bags. He lay there, dazed, his shoulders screaming in agony, the thick steam swirling around him like a malevolent fog. Through the white haze, he saw the silhouette. The golem hadn't moved. It had anticipated him. It had used his own speed against him, turning the narrow alley from a racetrack into a trap. This wasn't a dumb tank. This was a hunter. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He had to get out of the alley. He needed open space. Clank. Hiss. The sound was right on top of him. He looked up, and the monstrous form was there, looming over him. It raised its left arm, which was smaller than the other, and aimed a strange, cannon-like device at him. Before he could react, there was a loud thwump, and something shot out of the device. A four-pronged grappling hook, attached to a thick steel cable, slammed into the dumpster next to him with enough force to puncture the metal. The cable whipped around his legs, pulling taut and yanking him off his feet with brutal, mechanical efficiency. He hit the ground hard, the air knocked from his lungs. He was caught. The cable was wrapped tightly around his ankles, and a high-torque winch on the golem's arm was beginning to screech as it reeled him in, dragging him across the filthy ground like a hooked fish. "No! Let me go!" he screamed, his voice raw with fear. He scrabbled at the cable, but it was too thick, the tension too great. He was dragged to the foot of the iron monster. It stood over him, a silent, steam-wreathed executioner. Its single yellow eye seemed to peer down into his very soul, and for the first time, Slider understood what true, helpless fear felt like. This thing wasn't here to fight him. It was here to dissect him. The golem's much larger right arm began to move. It wasn't a fast movement. It was slow, deliberate, and utterly terrifying. He could hear the hiss of the massive piston in its shoulder and elbow as they activated, the groan of metal under immense strain. The reinforced gauntlet, a block of solid steel the size of a cinder block, rose, poised to strike. This was it. He was going to die. He closed his eyes, a pathetic whimper escaping his lips. He thought of his agent, his sponsors, his follower count. It all seemed so meaningless now. The blow came, but it didn't hit his head or his chest. It struck his left leg with a sound of shrieking, shattering carbon fiber and snapping metal. The piston-driven punch wasn't aimed at him, but at the complex support brace on his shin, the very piece of gear that allowed him to fine-tune his slides. The custom-built, 100,000 yen device exploded into a shower of sparks and shrapnel. The force of the blow was so precise, so mechanically powerful, that it didn't just break the gear. It drove a piece of jagged metal into his calf and shattered his fibula underneath. Slider screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure agony. His leg was a ruin. The pain was white-hot, blinding. Through his tear-filled vision, he saw the massive arm rise again. It moved with the same horrifying, clinical slowness. This time, it targeted his right arm, the one he used to balance during high-speed turns. He tried to pull it away, but he was still tangled in the winch cable. The steel fist descended. Crack! The sound of his own bone snapping was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He felt the ulna and radius give way, a sickening, grinding sensation that sent a fresh wave of nausea and agony through him. He was broken. Disabled. Systematically, efficiently, and brutally dismantled. The iron golem had taken away his quirk, his mobility, and his ability to fight, all without delivering a single life-threatening blow. This wasn't a fight. It was a vivisection. The winch cable went slack. The crushing pressure of the golem's presence receded slightly. He lay on the ground, a whimpering, broken mess of a hero, his blood mingling with the filth of the alley. The iron monster stood over him for a long moment. A small compartment hissed open on its chest. A slender, mechanical arm emerged, holding a small, flat square of metal in a pincer. The metal was glowing a dull red, fresh from some internal forge. The machine leaned down, the heat from its boiler washing over him. The pincer pressed the hot metal square against the nitro-charge logo on his chest. He screamed again as the fabric of his costume sizzled and melted, the heat searing the skin beneath. The smell of burning polyester and his own flesh filled his nostrils. The golem retracted its arm. It took one last look at its handiwork, then turned. Clank! Hiss! It began to walk away, its heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoing down the alley. It didn't run. It didn't rush. It simply departed, leaving a trail of steam that slowly dissipated in the cool night air. Slider lay there for what felt like an eternity, drifting in and out of consciousness on a tide of pain. Eventually, he heard the frantic sounds of sirens and shouting. The first police officer to find him, the young one from before, recoiled in horror. "Get a medic!" The officer yelled, his voice strained. "Hero down! I repeat, Hero is down." As the paramedics worked on him, cutting away his ruined costume, one of them noticed the brand on his chest. The seared fabric had cooled, and the mark was clear. A small, perfectly square metal plate had been fused to the material. Stamped into its surface was a single, damning word: reckless. The news hit the city like a shockwave. By the time the 10 o'clock news cycle began, every major network was leading with the story. The initial reports were chaotic, filled with witness speculation and grainy cell phone footage of the steam-filled alley. But the core facts were undeniable. Pro-hero Slider had been brutally attacked and left critically injured by an unknown assailant. "We are now getting reports from the scene," a news anchor said, her face grim, "where doctors are describing Slider's injuries as career-ending. His left leg and right arm were, in the words of one officer, systematically broken. The attacker, described by a handful of terrified onlookers as a giant, steam-powered robot, remains at large." The story exploded online. The term mechanical villain was trending within the hour. Conspiracy theories ran rampant. Was it a new weapon from the League of Villains? A piece of rogue military tech? A foreign power testing a new weapon on Japanese soil? But as more details emerged, a more disturbing narrative began to take shape. The news channels played Slider's pre-attack interview on a loop, where he cheerfully dismissed the collateral damage he'd caused. Then, they would cut to a shot of the shattered storefront and the gouged-out street. Finally, they showed a high-resolution police photo of the metal plate left on Slider's chest. Reckless. The message was clear. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a judgment. In a quiet apartment across town, Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, watched the report on his laptop, his perpetually tired eyes narrowed in concentration. He muted the sensationalist commentary from the newscaster. He wasn't interested in the panic. He was interested in the methodology. He pulled up the preliminary police report on a separate monitor. No fatalities. Injuries were severe but targeted, designed to incapacitate, not kill. The attacker disabled the hero's support gear first, then his limbs. The location was the site of the hero's own recent act of public negligence. The message left at the scene was a direct critique of that negligence. This wasn't the work of a chaotic villain who reveled in destruction. This was too precise. Too clean. It was the work of an analyst, a tactician. It felt more like a punishment than an attack. A cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient punishment. He took a long sip of his black coffee. A new, dangerous player was on the board. One who fought not for chaos or personal gain, but for some twisted, brutal form of ideology. This was going to be a problem. A very big problem. Meanwhile, in the sterile, quiet halls of Mizudafu General Hospital, All Might, in his skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi, watched the same news report on a television in the waiting room. He had been visiting a long-term patient when the news broke. He saw the footage of the steam, the reports of a mechanical attacker, and a deep, sickening dread coiled in his gut. He thought of a boy on a rooftop, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous anger. A boy who had accused him of recklessness, of valuing victory over safety. A boy whose mother lay in a bed just a few floors above, a victim of that same recklessness. A boy with a genius-level analytical mind, who could dissect a hero's weaknesses with terrifying precision. Can I be a hero who saves everyone? A hero who doesn't make those mistakes? No, the word echoed in Toshinori's memory, a ghost of his greatest failure. He stared at the screen, at the word reckless branded on another hero, and prayed to a god he didn't believe in that his gut feeling was wrong. He prayed that he hadn't, in his attempt to protect one boy from the world, accidentally unleashed a monster upon it. Far away, in a junkyard workshop shrouded in its own self-generated fog, Izuku Midoriya was being unbolted from the cockpit of the boilerplate Mark I. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a potent cocktail of adrenaline and catharsis. The burns on his leg ached, a faint memory of his first failure. Kaido helped him out of the machine, his face an unreadable mask of grim satisfaction. Izuku stumbled over to the workbench and looked at a small monitor displaying the live news feed. He saw the panic, the confusion, the birth of his new, terrifying legend. They were calling his creation the Steam Demon, a name born from the public's fear. He felt a sliver of the old, hopeful Izuku rise up in protest. A villain? Me? But he ruthlessly crushed it. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a consequence. He looked at the boilerplate, its metal frame still ticking as it cooled, its single eye dark and dormant. He had done it. He had taken his pain, his analysis, his rage, and he had forged it into a force that could not be ignored. The world of heroes had a new rule. Their actions had consequences, and he, the quirkless, powerless boy they had all dismissed, would be the one to deliver them. The Steam Demon had made its debut, and the age of unaccountable heroes was about to come to a violent, grinding halt. The staff lounge at Yui High School was, for once, utterly silent. The usual cacophony of competing personalities, present mixed boisterous retelling of a patrol, Midnight's provocative critiques of modern hero fashion, Cementos' dry, geological puns, was absent. All that remained was the low hum of the industrial-grade coffee maker and the flickering blue light of the large holographic screen that dominated the wall. On it, a newscaster was detailing the previous night's events with grim sensationalism. Shota Aizawa stood with his arms crossed, a steaming mug of black coffee clutched in his hand. His gaze was fixed on the screen, but his focus was inward. He was parsing the data, stripping away the media's manufactured panic to get to the core of the incident. The other teachers were arrayed around the room, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and professional concern. Career ending. Hizashi Yamada, present Mike, whistled, breaking the silence. He ran a hand through his ridiculous blonde pompadour. That's heavy. This wasn't just a beatdown. This was a message, a brutal one. Namuri Kiyama, Midnight added, her usual flirty demeanor replaced by a cold seriousness. The precision of it. They didn't just break his limbs, they shattered the support gear integral to his quirk. They targeted his identity as a hero. Principal Nizu, perched on a custom-built high chair at the head of the table, steepled his paws together. His beady black eyes, usually twinkling with intellectual mischief, were hard and unreadable. Indeed, this was not the work of a common thug or a glory-seeking villain. This was an assassination, not of a person, but of a career. And it was executed with the precision of a surgeon. All eyes turned as the door to the lounge hissed open. Toshinori Yagi entered, looking even more skeletal and haunted than usual. He had seen the news late last night, and the images had chased him through a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. He wordlessly poured himself a cup of coffee, his hand trembling slightly. All Might, Nizu said, his tone gentle but firm. You were at the sludge villain incident that preceded Slider's rise in popularity. Did you note anything unusual? Anything that might connect to this? Toshinori's heart hammered against his ribs. He thought of green eyes burning with a grief so profound it had shaken him to his core. He thought of a quirkless boy with an analytical mind that bordered on supernatural. "Tell them," a voice in his head screamed. "Tell them what you did," but he couldn't. How could he? How could he admit that he, the symbol of peace, might have single-handedly created this new, terrifying threat through a moment of callous rejection? To admit that would be to confess his own hypocrisy, his own failure. It would shatter the very symbol he had dedicated his broken body to upholding. So he lied. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Principal," he said, his voice a low rasp. He cleared his throat. "It was a chaotic scene. I was focused on the villain and the hostage. The collateral damage, while regrettable, was within acceptable parameters for an urban engagement of that scale." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Acceptable parameters. It was the cold, bureaucratic language of the Hero Public Safety Commission, the very language that had driven the boy on the rooftop to such despair. Aizawa shot him a sideways glance, his dark eyes sharp and questioning. He had noticed Toshinori's unusual pallor, the slight tremor in his hand. He filed the observation away for later. "The name the media has given it, the steam demon," Cementos rumbled, "is based on witness accounts of steam and the sound of heavy machinery. The attacker is a machine, or is piloting one. That makes it a technology-based threat, which means Power Loader should be taking the lead on analysis." Snipe drawled from his corner. "I already have," came a gruff voice from the doorway. Higuri Maijima, Power Loader, strode in, holding a data slate. His face was etched with a mixture of professional fascination and deep concern. "I've been running simulations based on the wreckage of Slider's gear and the structural damage in the alley. The results are unsettling." He projected an image from his slate onto the main screen. It was a complex physics model showing the impact forces. The punch that shattered Slider's support brace was delivered with approximately 4.5 tons of focused pneumatic force. That's not unheard of for a high-end construction mech. But the precision is the thing. It struck a surface area of less than 10 square centimeters. It didn't just bludgeon, it pierced. It was like being hit with a sledgehammer that had the tip of a needle. He swiped to another image, a spectrographic analysis of residue found at the scene. The steam wasn't just water vapor. We found trace elements of coal ash, sulfur, and industrial-grade lubricating oil. This thing isn't powered by a battery or a hydrogen fuel cell. It's a coal-fired steam engine. It's archaic. It's a walking antique, but one that's been weaponized to a terrifying degree. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall. "It's ideological," he said, his voice cutting through the technical jargon. Everyone turned to him. "Forget the mechanics for a moment. Look at the behavior, the target selection, the non-lethal methodology, the message left at the scene. This isn't about chaos. It's about accountability." He began to pace, his black jumpsuit making him look like a panther in a cage. "Slider was chosen for a reason. His takedown of that purse snatcher was flashy, destructive, and celebrated by the media. He was the poster child for what our attacker deems reckless heroism. The steam demon didn't just defeat him, it made a public statement. It used Slider's own fame against him to broadcast its message." "So you're saying this is some kind of vigilante?" Midnight asked. "No," Aizawa stated flatly. "Vigilantes, however misguided, typically try to stop crime. They emulate heroes. This thing, it's hunting heroes. It's an anti-hero. A predator whose chosen prey is us." He stopped pacing and looked directly at Nizu. "Whoever this is, they have an intimate understanding of heroes' society, a high-level analytical ability, and access to some seriously unconventional technology. They are dangerous not just because of their power, but because of their intelligence." Nizu nodded slowly, his whiskers twitching. "I agree, Aizawa. Your analysis is astute. The Hero Public Safety Commission has already convened an emergency session. They're treating this as a high-priority domestic terror threat." He looked around the room. "For now, all UA staff are to be on high alert. Review your patrol routes. Do not engage any suspect matching the description alone. This is not a foe to be underestimated." The meeting was dismissed, but the tension remained, a thick, suffocating blanket in the air. The ripples had reached the very heart of Hero Society's most esteemed institution. A single act of brutal retribution had shaken the confidence of the nation's greatest heroes. The system had been punched hard, and for the first time in a long time, it was showing a bruise. In a sterile, windowless boardroom deep within the headquarters of the Hero Public Safety Commission, the mood was far less analytical and far more furious. The commission president, a stern woman with iron-gray hair and a gaze that could curdle milk, slapped a folder down on the polished mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "One attack," she said, her voice a low, controlled hiss of rage. "One attack, and the public's confidence in pro-heroes has dropped 3 percentage points overnight." Social media is a cesspool of anti-hero sentiment, with this steam demon being lauded as some kind of folk hero in the darker corners of the internet. This is not just an assault, it is a public relations catastrophe. The other board members, a collection of grim-faced bureaucrats and former heroes now in positions of power, shifted uncomfortably. Slider was a liability. One of them, a man named Yakumura, offered, looking perpetually exhausted. His agency has been paying out record numbers in collateral damage settlements for months. He was a prime target for this sort of critique. "That is irrelevant," the president snapped. "The point is that one of our licensed heroes was publicly dismantled and humiliated. It makes us look weak. It makes the entire system look weak." She fixed her gaze on a man at the end of the table. A man who sat apart from the others, radiating an aura of quiet, weary competence. "Shoda Aizawa, erase her head," she said, her tone shifting from anger to command. "You have the highest success rate in the country for apprehending and de-escalating threats with non-traditional motives. This case is now yours. You will be the lead investigator. You are to use any and all resources necessary. I want this steam demon found. I want its operator identified. And I want this ideological infection stamped out before it can spread." Aizawa met her gaze without flinching. "Understood. What is your preliminary assessment?" she demanded. "The perpetrator is intelligent, meticulous, and patient," Aizawa said, his voice a flat monotone. "They are likely operating from a private, well-equipped workshop, given the nature of the machine. The use of steam power suggests an engineering background that is deliberately outside the mainstream support industry. They are physically fit, even without the machine, to withstand the G-forces and operational strain, and they are driven by a powerful, personal grudge against Hero Society, likely stemming from a specific incident where they, or someone they care about, were a victim of heroic negligence." His words hung in the air, a perfect, chilling portrait of the boy on the rooftop that Tashinori Yagi was desperately trying to forget. "Find them, Aizawa," the president ordered. "And end this." Izuku stood before a new schematic, pinned to a large corkboard in the workshop. It was a list, not of parts or mechanics, but of people. His next target. The aftermath of his debut had been more than he expected. He and Kaido had watched the news reports, monitored the online chatter, and absorbed the system's reaction with a cold, clinical detachment. The fear, the outrage, the grudging respect from the fringes of society, it was all fuel. It proved their theory. The monolithic structure of Hero Society had a crack, and they had just driven a superheated, steel wedge into it. "The Commission will put their best on this now," Kaido grunted from his workbench, where he was reinforcing the seals on the boilerplate's joints with the tungsten braces Izuku had designed. "They'll likely assign someone from the underground. Someone who understands stealth and tactics. Eraserhead, most likely." Izuku's hand paused in its writing. Eraserhead. He felt a pang of something complex, the ghost of his old admiration. Aizawa was one of the few heroes he had truly respected. Efficient, logical, and utterly devoid of the pointless flash and pageantry that defined men like Slider. To have him as an enemy was a complication. But it did not change the mission. "He's a logical choice," Izuku agreed, his voice steady. "His quirk will be useless against the boilerplate, but his capture weapon and combat skills are a significant threat. I'll need to factor that into my engagement protocols. First, we need to choose the next lesson," Kaido said, nodding towards the board. "Who's next to be held accountable?" Izuku had spent days compiling the list, cross-referencing his old notebooks with his new, darker research. He was looking for another perfect target, one that would escalate his message. Not just recklessness this time, but something deeper. Something more corrupt. His finger landed on a name. Pro-Hero Backlash. Backlash's quirk allowed him to absorb kinetic energy and redirect it in explosive bursts. He was a mid-tier hero, popular, but not a superstar. He was also the primary in-house hero for the Yamato Development Corporation, a massive, monolithic company known for its aggressive urban expansion projects and its habit of cutting corners on safety regulations. Izuku tapped a series of news articles he had printed out. 3 months ago, a fire broke out at a Yamato construction site. The emergency sprinkler system, which had failed multiple inspections, did not activate. The fire spread to a neighboring low-income apartment building. Backlash was the first hero on the scene. He pointed to another article. His official report states that he focused on asset protection, securing the construction site and preventing damage to Yamato's expensive equipment. He claimed the fire department was better equipped to handle the civilian evacuation. He slid a final, damning document across the table. It was an internal fire department report he had acquired through less than legal means from a disillusioned city clerk he'd contacted through a secure, encrypted channel. The fire department's arrival was delayed by 10 minutes because Backlash's energy bursts had destabilized the street, making it impassable for their trucks. By the time they arrived, 17 residents of the apartment building had suffered from severe smoke inhalation. 2 of them, an elderly couple, later died. Kaido read the documents, his expression hardening. He protected property over people. The oldest, ugliest sin, and Yamato Development publicly awarded him a bonus for his valor. Izuku finished, his voice laced with ice. They spun the story. Backlash the corporate savior. The victims were forgotten, their deaths a footnote. This was the perfect next step. To attack Backlash was not just to attack a hero, but to attack the corporate corruption that enabled and rewarded his brand of negligence. It was a direct assault on the economic engine that propped up so much of the hero industry. The plan was already forming in Izuku's mind, a complex flowchart of tactics, environmental weaknesses, and psychological triggers. Backlash was powerful, but he was arrogant. He relied on absorbing big, obvious hits. He was slow to react to subtle, multi-pronged attacks. And he always prioritized the safety of Yamato property. That would be his undoing. Over the next week, Izuku became a ghost. He surveilled the new Yamato Tower, a gleaming monument to corporate greed that was nearing completion. He studied the patrol routes, the security systems, the structural weak points. He stole blueprints from the city planning office. He didn't just plan a fight. He prepared a battlefield. He also prepared his message. While Kaido worked on the boilerplate, making it quieter, reinforcing the cockpit, and adding a new layer of ceramic plating to absorb impacts, Izuku worked on the information. He compiled the digital dossier, the suppressed fire report, the failed safety inspections, internal Yamato emails he had fished that discussed the unfortunate but necessary cost of the apartment fire. He was going to dismantle Backlash's body, and then he was going to obliterate his reputation. The night of the hunt was cold and clear. A sliver of a moon hung in the sky, offering little light. The steam demon, now quieter, its joints freshly oiled and its pistons muffled with new gaskets, moved through the industrial sector like a phantom. Izuku had sent an anonymous tip to the police about a potential bomb threat at the Yamato Tower. It was a lie, but it was a lie that would guarantee Backlash's presence. The hero, ever the loyal corporate soldier, would be the first on the scene. He watched from the shadows of a neighboring rooftop as Backlash arrived, his costume a garish display of the Yamato logo. The hero immediately began securing the perimeter of the tower, barking orders at the police to stay back. "I'll handle this," Backlash announced, his voice filled with self-importance. "My quirk is best suited for absorbing a potential blast. Protect the building at all costs." Izuku, observing through the boilerplate's optical zoom, felt a surge of cold fury. Even now, his first thought was the building. The property. He waited. He let Backlash complete his sweep of the ground floor. He let the hero grow confident, bored, convinced it was a hoax. Then, Izuku made his move. From his perch 3 blocks away, he activated the first of his pre-planted devices. A series of small, shaped charges he had placed at the base of a massive, disused water tower that stood next to the Yamato building. The explosion was not large, but it was precise. With a groan of tortured metal, the huge water tower began to topple, not away from the Yamato tower, not onto it, but towards the low-income housing project on the other side. A housing project filled with sleeping families. Backlash spun around, his eyes widening in horror. He had two choices. Absorb the massive kinetic impact of the falling water tower to save the dozens of innocent people in its path, an act that would leave him completely drained and vulnerable. Or he could let it fall. Izuku watched, his hand hovering over the controls of the boilerplate. This was the test. This was the judgment. What kind of hero are you, Backlash? For a heart-stopping second, the hero hesitated. He looked from the falling tower to the pristine, gleaming glass of the Yamato building. Izuku could almost see the calculations running through his head, the choice between his duty and his paycheck. With a curse, Backlash made his choice. He sprinted towards the falling tower, his body glowing with anticipation for the energy he was about to absorb. He chose the people, but the steam demon was not there to reward him for making the right choice once. It was there to punish him for making the wrong choice before. As Backlash braced for impact, Izuku made his entrance. He didn't come from the ground. Using the boilerplate's powerful grappling winch, he swung down from the rooftop, a silent, 8-foot-tall specter of iron and steam. He landed with a muffled, ground-shaking thud between Backlash and the falling tower. Backlash stared, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. You! Izuku didn't speak. He raised the boilerplate's left arm, not the grappling hook, but a new tool Kaido had installed, a high-pressure nozzle connected directly to the boiler's water tank. He fired. A concentrated, high-pressure jet of freezing cold water slammed into Backlash. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it soaked him, and more importantly, it soaked the ground around him. The water tower hit the ground with a deafening crash, landing just short of the housing project, exactly where Izuku's calculations had predicted. Backlash, drenched and confused, turned his attention back to the steam demon. "You'll pay for that, you monster!" he roared and charged. Izuku stood his ground. He vented a small cloud of steam at his feet, obscuring his movements. Backlash threw a punch, expecting to hit solid steel. Instead, Izuku had already pivoted, and the hero's fist glanced off the boilerplate's curved shoulder plate. Izuku didn't hit back. He fired another jet of water at the hero's feet. Backlash growled in frustration and swung again. Again, Izuku evaded, the movements of the massive suit surprisingly fluid. And again, another jet of water. The hero finally paused, confused. "What is this? Are you trying to give me a bath?" That was when the police helicopters arrived, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. The light beams hit the scene, illuminating the two figures. And then, everyone saw it. The ground around Backlash, super-chilled by the repeated, targeted jets of cold water and the frigid night air, was now a sheet of slick, treacherous ice. Backlash, whose quirk required stable footing to properly absorb and redirect energy, was standing on a self-made ice rink. He tried to take a step, and his feet slid out from under him. He flailed, pinwheeling his arms, before crashing to the ground. He was helpless. He was a powerhouse without a foundation. The steam demon took a heavy, deliberate step forward. Clank. Hiss. It stood over the fallen hero. But it didn't attack. Instead, every screen in a 10-block radius flickered. The news broadcast from the helicopters was hijacked. The jumbotrons in the distant city center, the cell phones of the officers on the ground, they all switched to a new feed. It was a black screen with simple, white text. And then, the documents began to appear. The suppressed fire report. The ignored safety violations. The internal corporate emails. A calm, electronically modulated voice, Izuku's voice, filtered through layers of distortion, began to read the evidence aloud, a damning, emotionless narration of Backlash's corporate-sponsored negligence. The broadcast ended with a single, chilling message on the screen. "Who protects you from your protectors?" Then, the steam demon acted. It raised its heavy, piston-driven fist, not to crush Backlash's skull, but to deliver a single, precise blow to the hero's shoulder, shattering his collarbone and dislocating the joint. It was the same disabling, career-threatening precision he had used on Slider. He then left the same branded metal plate on the hero's chest, this one bearing a new word, corrupt. Without another look, the steam demon turned, fired its grappling hook into the shadows of a taller building, and was gone, vanishing into the night as silently as it had arrived. Aizawa, watching the hijacked feed from a command van a mile away, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was an escalation. A massive one. The steam demon wasn't just a hunter anymore. It was a propagandist. It wasn't just breaking heroes. It was breaking the public's trust in them, piece by devastating piece. And he had no idea how to stop it. The ripples were spreading, and they were threatening to become a tidal wave. The city held its breath. In the week following the public dismantling of pro-hero backlash, a palpable tension had descended upon Muzurifu. The name Steam Demon was no longer just a sensationalist headline. It was a specter haunting the hero industry. Heroes patrolled with a new, nervous energy, their eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways, flinching at the hiss of a bus's air brakes or the clang of distant construction. The public, fed a steady diet of think pieces and heated debates online, was dangerously divided. The Steam Demon was either a terrifying, anarchic villain or a necessary, righteous fury, a force holding a corrupt system to account. There was no middle ground. For Shota Aizawa, the noise was a distraction. He operated in the silence, in the spaces between the headlines and the hot takes. His investigation had become a singular, all-consuming obsession. He had moved out of his Spartan apartment and into a small, cot-equipped office at a secure HPSC facility, a room that now resembled the den of a madman. One wall was a massive corkboard, a chaotic web of maps, photos, and documents connected by a spider's web of red yarn. At the center of the web were two photos, the broken forms of Slider and Backlash. Branching from them were analyses of their weaknesses, their patrol routes, their public records of negligence. Surrounding these were technical readouts from Power Loader, spectrographic analyses of the steam residue, and psychological profiles compiled by the Commission's top analysts. Aizawa ignored most of the psychological profiles. They were trying to understand a villain. Aizawa knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was hunting a broken idealist. He stood before the board, a cup of impossibly black coffee in hand, his eyes tracing the patterns. It was nearly 3 a.m. The city outside was a tapestry of sleeping lights. But here, under the harsh fluorescent glare, his mind was a razor. He's escalating, Aizawa murmured to the empty room. But the pattern is consistent. The targets aren't random. He began to pace, his capture weapon a familiar, comforting weight around his neck. Slider, public recklessness. Backlash, corporate corruption. Both were celebrated for the very flaws the Steam Demon attacked them for. It's not just about punishment. It's about hypocrisy. He needed a way to get ahead of the hunter. He couldn't track the machine. It left no electronic signature, and its thermal output was too similar to the city's industrial background noise to be isolated. He couldn't predict its location. But maybe, just maybe, he could predict its target. His eyes scanned the board, a sea of potential victims. He had compiled a list of every pro-hero operating in the prefecture with a black mark on their record, a formal reprimand for property damage, a civil suit for negligence, a sponsorship from a morally dubious corporation. The list was disturbingly long. He won't pick a top 10 hero, Aizawa reasoned aloud, his voice a low rasp. Not yet. That's too much heat. He's building a narrative, piece by piece. He needs a target that reinforces his message, but one that's isolated enough to be a manageable engagement. His gaze fell on a particular file. Pro-Hero Crustlord. It was a ridiculous name for a ridiculous hero. His quirk, exoskeleton, allowed him to secrete a durable, chitinous armor over his body. He was strong, durable, but slow and clumsy. His real claim to fame was his media persona, a loud, boorish, glory hog who specialized in taking down petty thieves with an absurd amount of force. He was infamous in the hero community for his catchphrase, yelled at the top of his lungs after every victory. Time to get shelled. The file was thick with civilian complaints. Cracked building foundations from his ground pounds. Cars crushed when he'd thrown a fleeing shoplifter into a parking lot. His agency had a full-time legal team dedicated solely to settling out-of-court claims. He was, in every sense of the word, a bully with a hero license, and 3 days ago, he had been celebrated on a morning talk show for his no-nonsense approach to justice. He was a perfect fit for the Steam Demon's ideological crusade. He was a hypocrite, he was reckless, and he was just powerful enough to be a challenge, but just stupid enough to be predictable. A plan began to form in Aizawa's mind, a cold, calculated trap. He couldn't force the Steam Demon to appear, but he could create the perfect hunting ground, bait it with the perfect prey, and wait for the predator to take the bait. He picked up his phone and made a call to the HPSC president. "I have a potential next target," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And I have a plan to use him as bait. It's risky, and the hero in question is almost certainly going to end up in the hospital." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Is he a valuable asset?" the president asked, her voice like chipping ice. "He's a public menace and a lawsuit magnet," Aizawa replied flatly. "Proceed." Izuku felt the change in the city's rhythm. The hero patrols were less predictable. There was a new, coordinated tension in their movements. He saw it in the way they scanned the rooftops, in the way they avoided isolated industrial areas after dark. He knew he was being hunted, and he knew, with analytical certainty, that the mind guiding the hunt belonged to Shota Aizawa. This knowledge didn't frighten him. It exhilarated him. It was a challenge. A complex, multi-layered chess match against one of the few heroes he had ever truly admired. He and Kaido had been hard at work. The boilerplate Mark I was no more. In its place stood the Mark II. The changes were not merely cosmetic. They were evolutionary. Kaido, spurred on by the challenge of creating a machine that could outwit a pro like Eraserhead, had outdone himself. The new chassis was slightly slimmer, using a honeycomb-structured alloy that was lighter but stronger than the previous solid plates. The joints were now buffered by high-pressure hydraulic dampeners, muffling the suit's trademark clank into a much quieter, more menacing thump. The boiler was more efficient, its exhaust filtered to reduce the telltale coal smoke to a thin, nearly invisible haze. They had even added a layer of experimental, radar-absorbent ceramic plating to the exterior, a costly and difficult addition, but one that would make the suit a ghost to most forms of electronic detection. But the most significant upgrade was in the control system. Izuku, having mastered the crude levers and pedals of the Mark I, now operated a far more sophisticated interface. Pressure-sensitive pads in the gauntlet's gloves translated his hand movements directly to the suit's manipulators. The foot pedals were more responsive, allowing for finer control over the suit's locomotion. He was no longer just a pilot in a machine. He and the boilerplate were beginning to merge, his thoughts translating into the suit's actions with increasing seamlessness. "He's setting a trap for you, boy," Kaido said one evening, gesturing with a wrench at the news feed Izuku was monitoring. Pro-hero Crustlord was on screen, preening for the cameras after stopping a bicycle theft by encasing the entire bike and its rider in a thick layer of chitin. "I know," Izuku replied, his eyes narrowed. He was already several steps ahead. He had identified Crustlord as a prime target days ago. The hero's sudden media saturation, the way his patrol routes were now conveniently leading him through isolated, easily monitored warehouse districts, it was all too perfect. It was a baited hook. "Aizawa will be there," Kaito warned. "He'll have the area staked out. Snipers, sensors, a support team in the wings. You'll be walking into an army that's expecting a monster," Izuku countered, a cold confidence in his voice. "They're expecting me to come in loud and heavy, like I did with Slider. They're expecting a direct confrontation." He turned from the screen and looked at Kaido. "But they've only analyzed my strength. They haven't yet understood my precision." He wasn't going to just walk into Aizawa's trap. He was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, before the trap was even sprung. The district Aizawa had chosen was a masterpiece of tactical terrain. A 4-block section of the old docklands, filled with abandoned warehouses, narrow, intersecting alleyways, and towering container cranes. It offered long sight lines for his sniper teams, plenty of cover for his ground support, and numerous choke points where he could corner his quarry. He had the area locked down. Motion sensors were hidden in the shadows. High-frequency microphones were placed to pick up the telltale sounds of the steam demon's approach. A team of stealth-based heroes, including the camouflage quirk user, Invisible Girl, were positioned as invisible spotters. And he, Eraserhead, was perched atop the tallest warehouse, a shadowy gargoyle overlooking his carefully prepared killing field. His bait, Crustlord, was lumbering through the main thoroughfare, grumbling into his calms. "This is ridiculous, Aizawa. There's nothing out here but rats and rust. I should be downtown where the cameras are." "Stay on your route, Crustlord." Aizawa's voice crackled back, devoid of sympathy. "And keep your comms chatter to a minimum. You're our only lure." Aizawa scanned the landscape through a pair of high-powered, thermal imaging binoculars. Nothing. No heat signature larger than a stray cat. No sound beyond the creaking of old metal in the sea breeze. The night was cold, the silence absolute. It was too quiet. A predator like Aizawa knew that perfect silence was often more dangerous than noise. It meant the other predator was holding its breath. An hour passed. Then two. Crustlord was growing increasingly agitated. Aizawa's team was growing restless. Doubt began to creep into the edges of his mind. Had he miscalculated? Had the steam demon sensed the trap and decided to stay away? Then it happened. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. One of his sniper's comms clicked open. "Sir?" The voice was tight with confusion. I think my scope is malfunctioning. The lens is fogging up." Before Aizawa could respond, another comm clicked. "Eraserhead, this is Spotter 2. We have a weird condensation forming on our optics. Can't see a thing." Aizawa lowered his binoculars. A thin, unnatural mist was beginning to drift through the alleyways below, clinging to the ground. It wasn't the thick, billowing steam from the slider attack. This was a subtle, creeping fog, barely visible to the naked eye, but it was clinging to glass and metal, rendering all optical surveillance useless. "He's blinding us," Aizawa realized, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through his patient calm. "He's not coming to the trap. He's already here. He's been here the whole time." The comms suddenly erupted in chaos. "Sir, motion sensor in Sector Gamma just went offline. Ground Team 1, report. Your comms are breaking up. He's here. I hear something. It's..." The line went dead with a burst of static. Aizawa cursed and vaulted off the edge of the roof, his capture weapon whipping out to catch a protruding pipe, swinging him silently down into the shadows of an alley. The hunter had become the hunted. The steam demon wasn't attacking the bait. It was systematically dismantling his trap, taking out his support network one piece at a time. Down on the main street, Crustlord finally realized something was wrong. The voices in his ear had been replaced by a wall of static. The streetlights at the far end of the block flickered and died, plunging the area into deeper shadow. "Aizawa? Team? Anyone copy?" he yelled, his boorish confidence finally cracking. "What the hell is going on?" He heard a sound from the warehouse to his left. A loud, metallic screech, like a support beam giving way. He instinctively turned, encasing his body in its thick, chitinous armor. "Who's there? Show yourself!" A section of the corrugated metal wall of the warehouse suddenly buckled outwards, torn from its rivets. But it wasn't the steam demon that emerged. It was a massive, 10-ton shipping container, shoved through the wall by some incredible, unseen force from within. It slid out into the street on a shower of sparks and came to a groaning halt, blocking his path of retreat. He spun around, only to see another container being pushed out from the warehouse on the other side of the street, boxing him in. He was trapped. The entire street had become a cage. From the oppressive silence, a new sound emerged. Thump, hiss. It was quieter than the reports had described. Deeper. More menacing. It was the sound of a predator that knew it had its prey cornered. The boilerplate Mark II emerged from the gaping hole in the warehouse wall. It was sleeker, darker, its metal frame seeming to drink the dim light. Its single, glowing eye fixed on Crustlord, and the hero felt a primal fear he hadn't experienced since he was a child. "So, the big tin can finally shows up," Crustlord blustered, trying to mask his terror with bravado. "You're in for it now, villain! Time to get shelled," he charged, lowering his head like a battering ram. He was pure brute force, a living cannonball of organic armor. Izuku, his mind a realm of calm, cold calculation within the cockpit, did not meet the charge head-on. At the last second, the boilerplate sidestepped with a surprising, hydraulic-dampened grace. As Crust Lord thundered past, Izuku's left arm shot out. Not the grappling hook, but a new attachment, a high-pressure grease gun, salvaged from an industrial maintenance station. A thick, viscous stream of industrial lubricant sprayed all over Crust Lord's back and legs. The hero stumbled, trying to regain his footing on the now slick asphalt. He spun around, his armor dripping with grease. What the? Izuku didn't give him time to recover. The boilerplate's right arm shot forward, but it didn't punch. Instead, the gauntlet opened, revealing a series of powerful electromagnets. He activated them. With a tremendous clang, a pile of discarded steel rebar and scrap metal from the alleyway flew through the air and slammed into Crust Lord's greased-up back, sticking to him like metallic burrs. The hero roared in surprise and frustration, the added weight throwing him off balance. This was Izuku's strategy. Not a brawl. A systematic incapacitation. He was using the environment, using the hero's own clumsiness against him. From the shadows of a high gantry, Aizawa watched the scene unfold, his mind reeling. The steam demon wasn't just a brute. It was a tactician of the highest order. The fog to blind his snipers, the targeted communication jamming, the use of the environment to cage the target, the lubricant and magnets to disable him. This was his own fighting style, turned up to an industrial scale. It was terrifying. He had to intervene. Crust Lord was being toyed with, systematically humiliated. Aizawa launched himself from his perch, his capture weapon flying. The carbon fiber alloy strips whipped through the air, aimed not at the boilerplate's body, but at the exposed piston joints at its knees. If he could immobilize it, he could end this. But Izuku had been waiting for him. An alert flashed on Izuku's HUD, a proximity sensor he'd hidden on the gantry. Aerial threat detected. The moment Aizawa's weapon snaked out, the boilerplate reacted. The steam vents on its shoulders and back erupted, not with a blinding cloud, but with short, controlled, high-pressure bursts. It was a propulsion system. The massive suit lurched forward and to the left with impossible speed, a clanking, 8-foot-tall machine performing a rocket-powered dodge. Aizawa's capture weapon missed by inches, wrapping harmlessly around a streetlight. He landed on the asphalt, rolling into a crouch. He stared up at the machine, which now had its glowing yellow eye fixed squarely on him. For the first time, Aizawa felt a flicker of genuine uncertainty. His greatest weapon, the element of surprise, was gone. Impressive, Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. You knew I was here. The boilerplate didn't respond vocally. Instead, a low hiss emanated from an external speaker, followed by a voice, calm, distorted, and chillingly familiar in its analytical tone. It was the voice from the Backlash broadcast. Eraserhead. Quirk erasure. Nullifies the quirk of anyone within your line of sight. Effective against genetic-based abilities. Ineffective against technology. The modulated voice was reciting his own file. Preferred weapon, a capture scarf made of carbon fiber and a special steel alloy. High tensile strength, but vulnerable to extreme temperatures and sustained, high-velocity shearing. Aizawa's blood ran cold. The machine wasn't just fighting him, it was narrating his weaknesses. It was the ultimate psychological blow, a tactic designed to unnerve and intimidate. Who are you? Aizawa demanded, slowly circling the machine, looking for an opening. I am a consequence, the voice replied. At that moment, Crust Lord, having finally scraped the rebar from his back, let out a roar of rage and charged again, this time at the boilerplate's back. Izuku didn't even turn. He had anticipated the hero's simplistic, one-track mind. A panel on the back of the boilerplate's legs slid open, and a thick, steel spike, superheated by a direct conduit from the boiler, shot out into the asphalt, anchoring the suit to the ground. Crust Lord slammed into the unmovable machine. The force of the impact was staggering, but the boilerplate barely budged. The hero, however, bounced off the anchored machine, his chitinous armor cracking under the force of his own failed attack. He stumbled back, dazed. With its back still to the hero, the boilerplate's full attention remained on Aizawa. This was the real fight. Aizawa threw himself forward, his capture weapon flying again, this time aiming for the head. He was faster, more agile. He knew he could outmaneuver the machine, but as he closed the distance, the fingertips on the boilerplate's left hand popped open, revealing 5 small, nozzle-like openings. With a series of sharp hisses, it fired 5 small, metallic objects. They weren't bullets. They were caltrops, small, 4-pointed spikes designed to cripple and impede. Aizawa, forced to change his trajectory mid-air to avoid landing on the spikes, lost the precious fraction of a second. It was all the time Izuku needed. The boilerplate's right arm blurred into motion. It didn't punch. It swung the massive, heavy-gauge pipe it had ripped from the warehouse wall earlier. It wasn't a precision strike. It was a battering ram, a sweeping, horizontal blow designed to clear the entire area. Aizawa had no choice but to leap back, the wind from the passing pipe rustling his hair. He landed lightly, his heart pounding. This was a battle of wits, of action and reaction, and his opponent was predicting his every move. He needed to get closer. He needed to find a weak point, a vulnerability. He feinted left, then darted right, his capture weapon a blur. He managed to wrap it around one of the boilerplate's arms, pulling taut. For a moment, he thought he had it. He pulled, trying to unbalance the machine. Then, the surface of the boilerplate's arm began to glow a dull red. Izuku was channeling steam directly into a network of pipes just beneath the ceramic plating, turning the suit's entire surface into a searing hot griddle. The special alloy of Aizawa's weapon began to smoke and sizzle, the heat traveling rapidly up the fibers. With a pained hiss, Aizawa was forced to release his grip, his hands smarting from the heat. Vulnerable to extreme temperatures. The modulated voice reminded him coolly, this was impossible. The machine had a counter for everything. It was prepared not just for a hero, but for him specifically. He was outmatched. The boilerplate took a heavy step toward him. Its massive gauntlet was raised, not for a punch, but in a gesture of finality. Aizawa braced himself, his mind racing, searching for one last, desperate option. Suddenly, a brilliant light flooded the alley, followed by a concussive boom. Boom! A massive explosion erupted from the boilerplate's right side, sending it stumbling sideways. Shrapnel and sparks filled the air. Izuku cried out inside the cockpit as the suit was violently thrown against the shipping container, the impact rattling his teeth and throwing every gauge into the red. Aizawa spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Standing at the mouth of the alley, his hands still smoking, was Katsuki Bakugo. He was in his full hero costume, a predatory grin stretched across his face. Looks like you could use a hand, Mr. Aizawa. Bakugo snarled, his voice a low growl of contained violence. I was in the area and heard a party I wasn't invited to. He had disobeyed a direct order to stay on his designated patrol route miles away. He had heard the distant sounds of the struggle, seen the unauthorized comms blackout, and, like a shark smelling blood in the water, he had come. Inside the boilerplate, Izuku's mind was reeling. Kaken? Here? Now? This wasn't part of the plan. This was a variable he could not, have accounted for. The suit's right side was damaged, the outer plating buckled, and a crucial hydraulic line in the shoulder was ruptured. His right arm was sluggish, unresponsive. Bakugo didn't wait. He launched himself forward, a second, more powerful explosion propelling him through the air. You big, clunky piece of junk! I'll show you a real fight, Aizawa shouted. Bakugo, wait! But it was too late. The fight had changed. It was no longer a cold, tactical chess match. It had become a chaotic, unpredictable brawl. As Bakugo flew towards him, Izuku was forced to make a split-second decision. His mission was complete. Crust Lord was incapacitated, his message sent. Engaging a high-power, unpredictable opponent like Bakugo in a damaged suit was tactical suicide. He had to retreat. The boilerplate's glowing eye seemed to focus on Bakugo for a fraction of a second. Then, it turned to Aizawa. In the chaos, Aizawa saw something he hadn't noticed before. The viewport on the helmet was not perfectly opaque. There was a thin, horizontal slit, and behind it, he could have sworn he saw a flicker of movement, something organic. Just before Bakugo's explosive fist could connect, the boilerplate's massive fist slammed into the ground, punching through the asphalt and into a water main below. With a roar, a geyser of high-pressure water erupted, creating a momentary wall between the machine and the two heroes. Using the geyser as cover, Izuku activated the suit's grappling hook, firing it into the darkness above. The winch engaged, and the massive, damaged suit was hauled upwards, disappearing into the oppressive shadows of the docklands. Bakugo landed, his attack having hit nothing but muddy water. "Get back here and fight me, you coward!" he screamed into the night. Aizawa didn't join the yelling. He was staring at the ground where the steam demon had been. His mind was replaying that final moment. The impossibly fast reaction times, the cold, analytical voice, the tactical genius that mirrored his own, and then Bakugo's arrival. The machine had been winning. It had been in complete control, but the moment Bakugo appeared, it had hesitated. It had chosen to retreat rather than engage him. Why? He walked over to where the boilerplate had been hit by Bakugo's explosion. The blast had torn away the outer ceramic plating, exposing the inner workings, and there, on a buckled piece of the tungsten steel frame, was a small, almost invisible crack. Through the crack in the metal, Aizawa could see the cockpit's interior padding, and for a split second, as the light from a police helicopter finally swept over the area, he saw something through the damaged viewport of the helmet, which was now slightly ajar from the impact. It was an eye. A single, wide, terrified green eye, filled with a pain and a fierce, desperate intelligence he recognized all too well. It was the eye of a problem child. The eye of a UA student. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It's a kid. The steam demon, the ideological terrorist, the mechanical monster that had outthought and outfought him at every turn, was a teenager. A child was piloting that iron coffin. A child was waging this war, and Aizawa, for the first time in his long, weary career, was truly, utterly terrified. The cat and mouse game was over. He now knew, with sickening certainty, that he was hunting one of his own.